Good evening, I'm Amirul Aiman and these are our top stories for tonight. Donald Trump calls for a new nuclear treaty with Russia, while Iran and the United States hold high-stakes talks in Oman. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. US President Donald Trump calls for a new nuclear arms treaty with Russia, arguing that the United States should move beyond the New START agreement, which expires on Thursday. On a social media post, he criticizes the existing pact, saying it is poorly negotiated and widely violated. He said American nuclear experts should instead design a stronger framework, one that would be more effective and longer lasting. Trump's remarks came in response to a proposal from Russian President Vladimir Putin, who suggested both sides continue for another year to observe the treaty's limits. Earlier, the Kremlin signaled that dialogue remains possible, provided Washington responds constructively to Putin's proposal. New START had been the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement between Washington and Moscow. It formed part of a Cold War-era system aimed at limiting nuclear arsenals and allowing mutual inspections. Security analysts warned that allowing the treaty to lapse without a replacement could increase global risk with the likelihood of miscalculation and encourage both sides to expand their nuclear forces. Iran and the United States are holding talks in Oman today on Tehran's nuclear program as regional tensions remain high and concerns over a wider conflict continue to grow. The scope of the discussions remains contested, with Washington saying it wants negotiations to extend beyond nuclear issues to include Iran's missile program, its support for regional proxies and human rights concern. Tehran, however, insists the talks in Muscat focus strictly on nuclear matters. The meeting will bring together Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the US Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, according to officials on both sides. Iran says it is seeking what it describes as a fair and dignified nuclear agreement, while warning it would respond forcefully to any military strike against its territory. Those warnings come amid mounting concern that US President Donald Trump could authorize military action as the United States strengthens its naval presence near Iran. Analysts caution that the divide between the two sides remains deep, raising the risk of confrontation rather than compromise. That's the headline for tonight. We'll be right back with more news after the break. Ada yang perdebatan bahawa GST perlu dikembalikan semula kerana ada yang mempertikaikan bahawa SST itu tidak efektif.
Isu buruh kanak-kanak bukan sahaja dalam bentuk fizikal tetapi juga bentuk moden yang lebih licik dan juga terselindung.
Kita tengok buruh kanak-kanak dan ada juga buruh paksa kanak-kanak.
Kumpulan FB dikenali sebagai grup budak-budak sekolah rendah yang didakwa menyebarkan gambar remaja perempuan tidak senonoh telah pun ditutup. Welcome back. US President Donald Trump has thrown his support behind Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi ahead of Sunday's national election. Trump described Takaichi as a strong and patriotic leader and said he plans to meet her at the White House next month. Takaichi, Japan's first female prime minister, is widely expected to win, with opinion polls suggest her coalition could capture around 300 of the 465 seats in the lower house of parliament. She leads the long-dominant Liberal Democratic Party in coalition with the Japan Innovation Party. However, some of her policy proposals have unsettled financial markets. Plans to suspend the 8% food sales tax and increase defense spending have triggered bond sell-offs and weakened the yen amid growing concerns over Japan's already heavy public debt. Analysts say that despite market unease, a decisive electoral victory could ultimately prove the least disruptive outcome, offering political clarity and stability for investors. With Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi widely expected to secure a landslide victory, polls point to strong backing from younger voters, a group that has traditionally seen low turnout. Dr. Hu Chiu-ping from the East Asian International Relations Caucus dissects Takaichi's appeal to this highly coveted group.
She's active on YouTube, and the Japanese version of that is Nico Nico. So she really tapped into the fan culture that really successfully branding not only her, but her party as really cool and trendy instead of being old and outdated. And also she promised to those young voters that in terms of domestic economic expectation, especially now that they are experiencing inflation and the depreciated yen, she proposed Sanaenomics. So it's a 21 trillion Japanese yen stimulus package and promised to cut down taxes on food. So all of these are done to appeal to the younger voters.
Calling for a snap election less than 100 days into office reflects both confidence and strategic calculation on Takaichi's end, taking advantage of a fragmented opposition and lack of a clear counter-message from the newly formed Centrist Reform Alliance. However, Hu points out there are still some underappreciated risks going into election day.
The voter turnout is not great, and especially for those who age between 18 to 39 years old. So they may support her online, but they may not turn out in person. So this is one variable that we can watch out for if there is a potential change in the expectation. So secondly is the market whiplash. So the Japan's debt to GDP ratio is already exceeding more than 200%, so which is very dangerous. And just very recently, she made a remark about how depreciated yen is actually good for Japan to attract more investors. And that really received a lot of backlash. And she was forced to even take back the comments. So this honeymoon could end before if they are not managing the economic expectation carefully.
Argentina and the United States have signed a sweeping trade deal aimed at cutting tariffs and expanding economic ties. The agreement is seen as a win for President Javier Milei as he moves to open up Argentina's economy while giving U.S. exporters greater access to Argentine markets. The pact was finalized in Washington, where U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Argentine Foreign Minister Pablo Quirno formally endorsed it. Under the deal, Argentina will reduce or remove tariffs on more than 200 American goods, including chemicals, machinery and medical equipment. Vehicles, cattle and dairy products will enter tariff-free under quota limits. In return, Washington will scrap tariffs on more than 1,600 Argentine products. The agreement reflects growing ties between Milei and U.S. President Donald Trump. Last November, Washington provided a $20 billion currency swap to stabilize Argentina's economy, bought Argentine government bonds rated as high risk, and stepped in to support the local currency. The move drew criticism at home. Some Trump supporters questioned why the U.S. was helping a distant country, while Democrats said it was a political favor and a misuse of taxpayer money. Future U.S. sanctions on Russia will depend on progress in negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, according to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Bessent says Washington is ready to impose additional measures if talks stall, including sanctions targeting Russia's so-called shadow fleet, which moves oil outside existing restrictions. He recently participated in talks in Miami with Russian officials, joined by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and U.S. President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Speaking at a Senate hearing, Bessent said current U.S. sanctions have been a key factor in bringing Moscow to the negotiating table. Those include measures on major Russian oil companies, such as Rosneft and Lukoil. He also said Trump has not introduced new sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet since returning to office in January 2025. The White House says there are no formal plans to deploy immigration and customs enforcement agents at polling stations during the midterm elections. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says she is not aware of any official discussions about positioning ICE agents at voting sites. However, she stopped short of ruling out the possibility that agents could be present nearby. The comments come as President Donald Trump continues to call for federal government to take control of elections in at least 15 unspecified locations, with claims of widespread voter fraud. Under federal law, the president is prohibited from deploying military forces at election sites, with several states ban firearms in and around polling places. Civil rights groups warn that past immigration enforcement activity near polling locations has discouraged some eligible voters from casting ballots, raising concerns about the potential chilling effect on turnout. The proposals have also drawn resistance from within the president's own party, with Senate Majority Leader John Thune and House Speaker Mike Johnson opposes federalizing elections. Taiwan's proposed $40 billion defense spending plan stalls amid a deepening political deadlock, with opposition lawmakers blocking the package while demanding concessions and closer scrutiny. Since December, the parliament has rejected the proposal 10 times. President Lai Ching-te has pledged to lift defense spending above 3% of gross domestic product, but his Democratic Progressive Party lost its parliamentary majority in the 2024 elections, leaving the government dependent on opposition support. The main opposition parties, the Kuomintang and the Taiwan People's Party, say they back stronger national defense. However, they have criticized delays in U.S. armed deliveries, including F-16V fighter jets, and argue the spending plan lacks sufficient detail. Opposition lawmakers are now pushing for scaled-down alternatives and clearer oversight mechanisms. Tensions have been further inflamed by Lai's refusal to appear before Parliament to defend the proposal in person. The impasse comes as Taiwan faces growing pressure from the United States to strengthen its defenses against China, which claims the island as its territory and has intensified military activity in nearby waters and airspace. The Philippines says it is pushing to conclude long-running negotiations on a South China Sea Code of Conduct this year as it assumes the ASEAN chairmanship. Speaking in Singapore, Foreign Secretary Teresa Lazaro says efforts to finalize the agreement are being stepped up. ASEAN and China plan to increase working group meetings from quarterly to monthly, supported by more frequent senior officials' discussions. Talks on the code have stretched on for years, stalled by disagreements over its scope, enforcement mechanisms, and whether it should be legally binding. 4 ASEAN members, Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam, claim parts of the disputed waterway. China, however, asserts sovereignty over most of the South China Sea, despite an international ruling that rejected the legal basis for its claims. While Lazaro acknowledged that completion is not guaranteed, she said momentum has improved and expressed cautious optimism as negotiations enter the next phase. Indonesia says it could withdraw from a US-led Board of Peace if this initiative fails to deliver meaningful progress towards Palestinian independence. Speaking in Jakarta, Indonesia Foreign Minister Sugiono said President Prabowo Subianto would not hesitate to pull Indonesia out if the board's direction does not align with the country's core priorities.
Sugiono said Indonesia's benchmarks are clear: an immediate end to the war in Gaza, lasting peace in Palestine, and ultimately full Palestinian independence and sovereignty. He also cast doubt on the board's readiness, saying it is not yet fully operational and lacks a clear structure, including a defined secretariat or office. The Board of Peace was launched amid a fragile ceasefire in Gaza agreed last October, following more than years of devastating war between Hamas and Israel. The truce has been plagued by delays in humanitarian access, disputes over territorial control, and accusations of violations by both sides, leaving its long-term viability in question.
That concludes AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Amirul Aiman. Thank you for watching. Good night.